Well, welcome everyone. I'm so glad you could join us. Today we have Josh from Pacific Northwest Bigfoot Maps, and he's put together an incredible tool for anyone curious about the location of encounters, including A, B, and C class encounters. And Josh, I know how much time this takes, and I love that you do it, and it's really appreciated. I'm excited to have you here. I've got a set of questions I want to ask, but like I said earlier when we were talking before the show, seriously, feel free to expand, talk, ramble, whatever you want to do. This is your time. It's not my time. I'm really excited to learn more about what you do. So if you don't mind, I'd like to throw out the first couple questions and then feel free to add to them or whatever you want to do. If you're cool with that, does that sound all right?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Excellent. Thanks again for being here, Josh. So
thanks for having me.
Yeah, tell us where you're at, first of all.
I'm located in Portland, Oregon, which, is a city, but it's in the middle of great Bigfoot territory.
Yeah, that's right. Portland. So in case anyone's listening and doesn't, well, everyone knows where Portland is. It's all over the news right now too, isn't it?
Yeah, unfortunately.
Right south of me. I'm about 2-hour drive north of you. So Portland, Mount Hood, the shadow of Mount Hood.
Yes.
Which, if anyone's aware, if you drive up to this really cool looking hotel, and if you were like me and The Shining is one of your favorite movies, it's actually where they filmed the outside of the Overlook Hotel. Isn't that right?
Yes. Yeah. The exterior.
The exterior. Yeah. Not the interior. The interior was some Sun Valley place, I think, or Colorado.
I think so. Yeah. Something in Colorado or Utah.
Yeah. Yeah. So cool. One of my favorite movies. Of course, I saw it as a 14-year-old, scared the hell out of me, but it was good. I won't stay in a room called 237 ever, but that's cool. So Portland. So tell a little bit about the kind of the environment, what it's like in Portland when it comes to Sasquatch and Bigfoot and the paranormal.
Well, you probably wouldn't hunt for Bigfoot in Portland proper.
Right.
Although looking at my sightings database, people have seen Bigfoot within the city limits more than you would think, especially in some of the bigger forested parks. But mostly, Bigfoot's not really an urban creature. So if I'm to go sort of researching, I would go to Mount Hood area, or my favorite area, which is almost equally as close to Portland, is the Mount St Helens area.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Just across the Columbia there. That's like one of the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest is one of my favorite places to get outdoors and go backpacking, camping, driving, day hiking.
Yeah,
whatever absolutely. It might be. It's just very accessible and really cool. And I mean, it's unique to see the such recent aftermath of a volcano eruption.
Yeah, isn't that wild?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so some of those places are, that were in the, what do you call the blast radius are very cool.
Right. The north part. Yeah.
And, the area is home to one of the most exciting Bigfoot stories and one of the oldest Bigfoot stories, which is that Ape Canyon incident. Which did you do one of your stories about that?
I do. The first immersive story I did after I did the first season of the little 7 to 8 minute interviews with some contacts I have. The first story I did was a Fred Beck story, and I kind of reenacted it, did some of the dialogue, and we're going to look at one of those maps. So people that are watching this, or if you're listening to it, we'll try to describe it for people listening on the podcast a little bit as we go through. First of all, what caused you to be interested in GPS and mapping Sasquatch sightings?
Well, I'm a GIS analyst. That's my job. And so I've always been interested in maps and like environmental and science and archaeology. I was an archaeologist, and then I sort of made kind of a lateral career move into GIS, still kind of working for the same type of companies in the same industry, basically sort of the commercial side of archaeology and environmental sciences. And it's always been, it's both a career and something I'm genuinely interested in, just maps and, the environment and sort of human culture throughout the ages and the way all those things come together.
Mm-hmm.
And Bigfoot is something I've been interested in ever since I was a kid. Just like almost everyone you talk to, I learned about Bigfoot the same way, from the classic TV shows In Search Of, watching reruns when I was a kid. And I loved every episode, but a lot of it, I kind of, as time went on, I kind of came to disregard or just think of as, blatantly false or unbelievable. But Bigfoot always hangs on the edge of reality to me. There's so many witness accounts with people who seem so sincere, and there are these, in my opinion, it's very few and far between, but there are these pieces of evidence that are like really hard to discount.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of keeps me interested in the idea of Bigfoot, is that, it just nags at you like, of all the different paranormal encrypted things, it's like, it feels like maybe it could be true. So that kind of keeps me interested in it. And I was just, kind of doing my job, and I thought, I wonder if there's data out there that I could pull into this software and like just look at, like maybe when I'm taking like a 5-minute break, like my brain's fried, I just want to not do my, like everybody does at work, you just want to take a little mental health break and look at something else. So and I always, whenever I talk about this, I like to give credit where credit's due, because my first thought was, well, where could I find this data? And so out of the blue, I emailed Cliff Barrickman of, Finding Bigfoot fame. He didn't have that data collected himself, but he showed me where to find it. Basically from there, I just was like, okay, well, I've got the Bigfoot report data. Now, what can I compare it to? What other environmental data can I compare it to? Or how can I use it in the ways that a biologist would use data about a known animal in order to try to learn more things about that animal through GIS? So basically, kind of inspired by what I know about the way that biologists and cultural anthropologists and archaeologists use GIS, I've tried to apply some of those philosophies, if you will, to this Bigfoot data that I was able to find.
Yeah. Have you found like parallels between migration? I mean, we're obviously going to look at some pictures. We'll talk about this a lot, but just off the top of your head, is there any kind of pattern, seasonal pattern or migration that you've noticed?
Well, I did do the one set of maps for trying to kind of suss out a migration pattern in Western Washington.
Okay, good. I've got those. I'll pull those up in just a second. Awesome.
And just to quickly answer your question, if I was to say I saw a pattern, it was that higher elevation sightings were more prominent in summer,
Okay.
which I think makes sense, because higher elevation areas, like for instance, up on the slopes of Mount St. Helens or Mount Rainier, are like more accessible weather-wise during the summer, and they'll have more food sources like blooming if it's plants, or living there if it's animals, during the summer months. So I thought that was, if there was an interesting pattern I got from that attempted analysis, that was it. It was like, it kind of makes sense that higher elevations would be used more for by any species during the summer months, and the Bigfoot reports seem to hew to that pattern.
Okay. Have you found a lot of differences between, say, like the Mount Hood area, and then I know Mount Hood is technically kind of on the border of the Gifford Pinchot, or I don't even, is it actually inside the Gifford Pinchot? I don't think it is, but it's on the border.
No, I think it's two different national forests, and
Yeah.
they're just separated by the Columbia.
That's right.
And the kind of human, roads there. I don't think they go up to the border of the river, but it's basically Gifford Pinchot, Washington, Mount Hood,
Right.
Oregon. But yeah, they're I mean, if they're arbitrary boundaries, it's the same forest, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I really want to pull these up because I think this is going to give us a lot of talking points here. Before I do, let me ask one question that kind of leads into this. What's the most interesting thing you found as a GIS mapper of Bigfoot? The most bizarre, how about this? The most bizarre thing you weren't expecting to find that kind of just popped out at you.
Well, the most unexpected thing to me is like you look at the overall sightings and so or reports. I prefer to call them reports than sightings because not all of them are technically sightings. Like some of them are just auditory reports or
Sure.
whatever. And I have about 8,500 reports in this database from 14 different organizations, BFRO type organizations.
Okay.
Um, and they span from like northern British Columbia, down to Florida. So basically North America.
Hmm.
And what's interesting to me is the thing that I think would surprise people that aren't engaged with Bigfoot is like where these are. You know, generally if you look at it at a broad glance, they're like kind of where you'd expect. They're in national forests and mountainous areas, and most of them, if you did it just a raw count, like most of them are in the Pacific Northwest, Northern California. But if you look closely, like I mentioned earlier, there's several, if not up to 20, like in the Portland city limits.
That's so wild. That
Or
is so
there,
wild.
I remember when I did a map of North Carolina, I was surprised that there were like a lot on the coastal plain of North Carolina, which I did not expect. And so the thing that has shocked me the most is that when you look at the reports closely is the variety of places that they are. Someone who's not engaged with Bigfoot would be really surprised at all the different places people, um, at the very least, that people think they see them.
Okay. Well, let me just pop this open here so you can see it, and then people that are watching on YouTube or wherever this is going to show, they can see it as well. Right here, Josh, I've got a map. It's Bigfoot reports within 50 miles of the 33rd parallel. Can you see that okay?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, perfect. This one struck me, and I thought this was the coolest thing. First of all, I wanted to ask why you chose the 33rd parallel, and then I wanted to talk about the significance of the sightings in that area.
Okay, well, this one was like a little shout out to sort of Bigfoot believers who are kind of into the what people call like the woo factor.
Okay.
Um,
The
do you
woo
know what I mean?
factor. Kind of. No.
So, I feel like if you listen to a lot of Bigfoot podcasts or whatever, you'll hear some people say, like, is it flesh and blood or is it something else?
Got it.
Right.
Okay.
So, this is a map for the people who are dedicated to thinking it's something else
Mm.
because the 33rd parallel is, you know, um, a line of latitude that is thought in sort of new age communities to hold like a lot of significance. Um, do you know what ley lines are?
I do know what ley lines are. I have a
So,
story about ley lines and my experience, but yeah, go ahead.
so the 33rd parallel is like considered, I think, to be like a ley line, and many sort of mystical sites
Okay.
lie on or near the 33rd parallel.
For
So
our
I thought,
listeners, really quickly, can you give a little layman's term of a ley line?
well, my understanding, and I'm not an expert on this.
Mm-hmm.
I want to forward it by saying I'm not an expert on this. Is that they're just like supposed to be sort of lines, sort of a grid of magnetic power on
Right.
the Earth. Does that
Right.
sound right?
That's what I heard. I heard and what I was told, we were talking about that, and he had heard of them as well. And another gentleman I was with, a electrical engineer, was with us, and he was talking about how they're actually more common than not, and they run vertically and horizontally, kind of like a shield around the Earth. And that was his understanding. Now I don't know if that's what you've heard.
Yeah, basically.
Okay, cool. So the 33rd parallel, is that an actual ley line?
Well, these things are hard to pin down because these are not like things that are accepted by mainstream science.
Mm-hmm.
So when you go looking for facts on these things, um, you kind of can pick and choose between what people are saying.
Got it.
But there is some kind of mystical quality to the 33rd parallel that folks talk about. That's what I've gathered, and that's the inspiration behind this map.
Let's look at, we were talking about migration. So I have these up by spring, summer, fall, winter. I started with a spring one. So tell me about what we're looking at right here.
So what we have here is just, I took all the Bigfoot reports in Western Washington and I broke them up by season. Although, as you can see, the red points, I didn't have the season for those. So I just left those ones on every map.
Okay.
And, the red ones let you keep an idea of where concentrations are regardless of seasons. But, basically, if you, I kind of made it like 4 identical maps except for the seasonal points so that you could kind of scroll through and sort of watch the points move.
Yeah, let's do that real quick. So here's spring, here's summer, and I'll go back in a second. Here's fall, and here's winter.
And what I thought was interesting is, like, you see from spring to summer, you see the sightings get more numerous.
And
there's
spring and summer again. Yep.
And you see them get more numerous in these high elevation areas like the North Cascades, and especially right there around the toe slopes of Mount St. Helens.
Sure.
And in the Olympics.
Right. I'm going to highlight here. So this area, can you see that red dot floating around there?
That's Mount Rainier.
Right. So here's Mount St. Helens down below.
Yes.
Right. Of course. Yeah. And then you have Mount Adams, and then we're down to Mount Hood right down here. Right. So, okay. So here's Mount St. Helens. So I'm noticing, and this is the Gifford Pinchot. I'm outlining right now, basically the southern part of Washington State. And you can see the Columbia River. I'm kind of moving my cursor along. That's the opening to Columbia from the Pacific Ocean down, and good old Portland, which is where you're at. And then I'm up up north of there. So if we look at this, as I look at that, I'm looking at, again, I'll go back to spring and summer. Talk to me about the significance in the Gifford Pinchot, in particular near Mount St. Helens, what you see in that area.
Well, my thinking is that, I guess at one point recently, a lot of Bigfoot researchers were talking about migration.
Mm-hmm.
And I've noticed, like, with some Bigfoot researchers I've been talking to, or that you'll hear interviewed, that point of view has shifted a little bit from migration to more of what's known as like a seasonal round. So instead of like migration over vast distances, traveling seasonally in more of a regional area to sort of exploit different food categories, based on the season. And again, this is all speculation because
well, of course, yeah, everything's speculation, of course.
But these maps to me kind of make it look like, well, in summer, there's a lot more reports at these higher elevations where certain food sources would be more available during the summer months, like your berries and, even little various animals that Bigfoots might try to eat would be more active on those higher slopes.
Yeah.
During the summer months.
Let's go from summer to fall here. So we're in summer right now. You can see the white dots kind of spread all, and I do see more in the upper elevations on the Cascades. So now I'm going to go to fall, which seems a little more scattered out to me.
And, say that this seasonal round for foraging is like a viable theory. You could think that they have to go, as fall sets in, perhaps they have to access a wider variety of environments in order to find food sources.
Do you think snowmelt has something to do with that, and levels of river and lakes that rise due to snowmelt, say like August, September, that area?
I got to be honest with you. I've never thought about
I'm just curious.
rising lakes, and
Well,
that's
and
one thing I haven't thought about.
when do we have our salmon runs here? That's isn't that November?
Well, I do have that salmon map.
Oh, you do. Did you?
So
I don't know if you said that to me.
I think it's summer and fall is the salmon runs.
Yeah, there's two of them. Okay.
And so I to kind of, if you don't mind, if I mention that salmon map, that's one of my favorite of my maps. Because I thought there was a pretty strong correlation between active salmon streams and the Bigfoot reports in the active salmon seasons. It was 42%.
Right.
We're within, I believe it was a quarter mile.
Okay. I'm running through these. I didn't bring that one up. I apologize for that. I don't have that.
That's okay.
But that isn't that interesting to think that that could possibly have something to do with their migration as well, meaning that that is a food source.
Yeah, and I don't think that's unprecedented for any kind of, larger
Bear
animal.
mountain
I think the larger and more I feel like I'm a little out of my depth talking about this. I'm not a biologist, but
sure.
I do think it's generally true that the larger and more complex an animal, the larger range it has.
Okay.
And if it's like an omnivore, like a bear, it's going to be aware of the availability of different categories of food during different times of the year.
Sure. Well, these four maps seasonally are fantastic. And do you update them frequently, or do you feel like you need to, or are you basically, where are these sightings like year from year? Where are you getting this information?
Well, that's a really good question. And unfortunately, like my sighting database is static.
Okay.
I just downloaded it and I have not been adding sightings to it. I'm kind of not set up for that. This is an opportunity I could give a shout out though to a fellow Bigfoot GIS guy, for lack of a better term.
Sure.
Who's on Instagram as Bigfoot Mapping Project.
Mm-hmm.
And he has not only like a web portal where you can report a sighting and he'll add a point to his database.
That's right.
But he also has like an iPhone and Android app.
Yes, and it's only $1.99. I actually downloaded it the other day.
I haven't downloaded it myself yet, but I just think I always like to mention that because it's like I kind of just took this as like a cartography project, and he has taken a whole different angle with what you can do with this technology. So it's very cool what he's doing.
Do you two work together at all? Do you talk or compare notes?
We have talked. I have not like asked to look at his data, but he's done a few thematic maps, kind of like maps that I've done, and yeah, we have spoken, but it's kind of cool. I feel like we come at it from different. We're basically using different potentials of this technology.
That's awesome. I love that. Let's jump forward here. Here we go. I wanted to talk about this little area. Obviously, you know what this is. We're looking at Ape Canyon, where the Fred Beck story, 1924, Fred Beck and a couple of his fellow miners were out there looking for an area to mine. And within a week, they had 4 to 5 different encounters, which is crazy and wild. And his stories are so bizarre. And he had this whole take on the interdimensional plane of Bigfoot, which is really kind of interesting to think about. They exist on a different plane of vibration and will pop out. And that was his whole thing.
Yeah.
And there's direct quotes from him when he wrote the book. The Ape Man, I fought the Ape Man of Mount St Helens or something like that. So tell me about this real quickly here.
Well, so I'm sure you're aware of Mark Marcel, who is a Bigfoot researcher and surveyor in Washington, who availed himself of property records to nail down exactly where that cabin site was. And I was like, and he's very secretive about that information. And I understand why, because the cabin site is of a date that makes it an archaeological resource. So it's protected under various federal statutes, and it's part of the National Forest's inventory of archaeological resources. So ethically, for him, he doesn't want to reveal where it is. And this map doesn't reveal where it is either, because as you can see, it's possible.
Right.
But I was very intrigued, and I was like, I wonder if just using the access I have to online property records, because for my job, I will often look up these old, what are called government land office maps that were basically used as guide maps for settling the West. So they date back to the 1800s, and they're updated every so many years, maintained by the government or the BLM in some cases. And, they're all online as images. So I basically was like, I wonder if I can replicate what Mark Marcel did with just online sources. Long story short, I could not. He definitely went to county records offices to find these mining claims, and nail down the exact location. But based on the slightly lower level research I could do just online, that's the vicinity of the cabin as far as I could tell.
Okay. It looks, as we're looking at the map, you can see there's a great elevation to the north of it, or I should say a great incline that looks like it's pretty steep. And this is on the southeast side of Mount St. Helens, I believe.
Yes.
Yes, yeah. Near the Plains of Abraham, which you can see if you drive up to Mount St. Helens. If you go up to Johnston Ridge, you can kind of look to the left and look over the opening. You can see where the whole thing is, but it's not really accessible that easily unless you're a hiker, going out and backpacking. Yeah, incredible. And so I see about 1, 2, 3, I see about 10 different sightings here around that area. Do you believe that those are current or recent, or do you think those could possibly be way back in the mid 19th or 20th century?
Well, most of them are probably more. I would say they are mostly from the 70s to the early 2000s.
Okay.
I actually have the dates. I mean, I just didn't display them on that map, but you can see that one plotted at the base of the canyon there.
Okay.
Is the actual plotted report for the Ape Canyon incident. So
this area or
right. At the base of Ape Canyon. So where I have it labeled.
Right here. Got it.
Yes.
Okay. Yep,
so that point right there is the where they had plotted the Ape Canyon incident in this database, but clearly wouldn't be where the cabin was.
Right. That's fantastic. It's a incredible story. And
I love it. Yeah.
It's haunting. It's just, I mean, these things were running on their rooftop. There's a number of them. Apparently Fred shot one and another one shot another one, and they watched it fall off the cliff and never saw it again. So there's a lot of interesting, I wouldn't say lore to it, but there's a lot of different stories that come with it. So this was very interesting. And this is in the Willamette Meridian, Washington area. What are we looking at here? I still see Ape Canyon, but now I'm seeing grids.
Okay, so this is the exact same extent, basically, as the last map. I did not put the possible cabin site on this map.
Okay.
But these grids are those old government land office maps.
Okay.
So this was basically showing my process.
So your process is you will look at the grid, then you'll look at, say, the location using those numbers, or how does that process work there?
Well, so I've got those grids that I use a process called geo-referencing to make sure that they're actually lined up with the land, like where they're supposed to be. And then I use those numbers to try to cross-reference with mining claims that I could find. And like I said, I wasn't able to 100% determine, like I wasn't able to find, oh, here's a mining claim with what's his name, Marion Smith and Fred Beck's name on it. But I was able to kind of narrow down basically where it would be. But, you know, saying that, it's like Ape Canyon's not that big. So there's basically a 2-mile radius, basically put a 1 or 2 mile circle there right towards the top of Ape Canyon. And it's somewhere in there, you know?
This area right here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Fantastic. All right. There's another grid. All right. So British Columbia. Lots of stuff going on in British Columbia. I know Les Strout went up to an area up here. I can't remember the name, Ketchikan, I think it was called. And there are just hundreds of sightings. And it's the North Shoshone tribe is up there. The Tlingit tribe is up there. And there's a lot of different stories. When you're mapping something that comes to, say, British Columbia, Washington, I should say anywhere, does that ever play into it? Do you look at possible records based on Native American or First Nations recollections or encounters?
Well, I have not done any map really relating to anything with indigenous folks at this point. You know, That's a good idea. I've had some suggestions as far as that. I like to try to be like super respectful though. So I don't want to depict anything with indigenous folks like where I would be not depicting it properly or in the way they would want it depicted. So honestly, out of what I would consider to be respect, I've kind of shied away from that. You know, when I was an archaeologist, I worked with a lot of indigenous folks from tribes here in the Northwest, like the Umatilla, and a small group that's not actually a recognized tribe called the Wanapum. And, you know, I would like try to talk to them about this kind of stuff, and it didn't seem like a comfortable subject. And maybe I just didn't have the kind of rapport, but I did feel like I had a rapport with these folks, you know, like I did feel like I was on a friendly level. But you know, some of this stuff is sacred, and it's like private. And so basically I've just shied away from that because of a sense of respect.
I love that. And I think that's what's missing in this field, if you will, but in general in society, is the lack of respect for the indigenous tribes that were here before. Well, I have a few contacts in Native American cultures locally here, and one of them has become an incredible friend of mine. Went camping with him, and I've learned so much. And I asked him about that, and I said, you know, it's not about finding out where they are. It's about knowing where they are so that you can respect their existence, you know, and not go in, you know. And I'm not going to put down anyone's, you know, process. If people want to go out and knock on trees, if they want to take a bat out and hit them, if they want to go, you know, squatching with a whistle, that's their thing. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's not everybody's process. But for some people, they are very cognizant of the fact that this goes back with Native culture a long ways. And there's so many stories. This area right here, I don't know if you knew this, Josh. Where is, I just had it. Okay, up in here. There it is. If you can see where I'm spotlight, that's supposedly where Albert Ostman was abducted. And that's the same time, the same year that Fred Beck had his incident. Isn't that interesting?
It's also just another like amazing story.
Yeah, isn't that wild? Now that, I don't know what I think about that story. I sure had a really fun time making the episode, but it's it was so detailed, and he waited 60 years to come out with it. And it's the stuff of nightmares. We need like a really good director to go. James Cameron needs to make that, you know, somebody who's really good with CGI.
And it's just interesting. Like, you know, he came later and he signed the affidavits and stuff. Yeah. I don't know. It's a weird one. That's a weird one. I don't know what to think about that either. It could be just completely made up. I don't know.
If so, he is a hell of a storyteller. I gotta say.
True.
Yeah. This next one, let's go down to your home. Let's go look at Portland. Man, extreme density, and that is Portland, basically, isn't it?
Well, as you can see, it's just east of Portland. It's basically Mount Hood.
Right. So here's Portland right here. And then you've got Mount Hood. And you've got that area spanning the river. You can see that.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
and that's one thing I always love. And if to go back to like the origins of being interested in Bigfoot, I remember an episode of In Search of that showed a Bigfoot swimming,
Yeah.
and it scared me so badly. Like after I saw that,
Right.
I would be out like in a canoe with my mom and dad or whatever, and I would just be like looking at the water, just thinking,
Right.
when is a Bigfoot going to swim under this canoe?
Right. It's like the closing scene from Friday the 13th when Jason pops out and grabs her. She's sleeping in a canoe
Yes,
and
but a
pulls her
Bigfoot.
down. But it's a Bigfoot. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that is wild. I've heard the same story, and they called him Scar Chest or something. Apparently, he had a big scar across his chest, and he
Huh.
would swim back and forth. And so that I think that's probably the same story. If you look right here, we're starting to get into the Yakima Valley where I'm circling. This is kind of south central Washington
Yeah.
State, and apparently this individual, if you will, crosses the river, swimming back and forth just to the east of Mount Hood. Now, again, these are just things I've heard. Again, like we've said, it's all supposed, right? But I think that's really interesting that what if they're swimming out there, and why not? Why not, I suppose.
There's a lot of stories about them swimming across the Columbia that I've heard. So
it's wild.
I mean, if you've ever like been out on a boat on the Columbia, that's a pretty damn big river. I don't know that I could swim across it, but
that's where I learned to water ski. So yeah, it's cold, it's dark, it's creepy and awesome.
Yeah.
but it's kind of haunting. Doesn't matter where you are, if you're up in Washington State or if you're on the border, it's a haunting river. And now when you think about a Sasquatch swimming and these big lanky arms doing the crawl stroke, it is very frightening. I don't know, it'd be more frightening seeing a crawl stroke or seeing a doggy paddle and just seeing a head bob. I don't know. Now I'm gonna have nightmares tonight. Awesome. All right. And so here, this was interesting too. So you set up perimeters of fires. Now, are these natural fires in Oregon here? We're looking at a map of Oregon with sightings within 5 miles, which are, holy cow, there's a lot of them. But then I see these fire perimeters. What's the point of having the fire perimeters on this map?
Well, this is kind of one where I was inspired by the fact that we were going through these horrible wildfires. Like last year at this time, it was 2 weeks of unbreathable air here in Portland. So this is right after that. These are the fires that caused that.
Okay.
And that's what inspired me. I was like, I'm living through this. I wonder if I can make a map of it.
Yeah.
Oh, I knew I would be able to because like people map the hell out of fires, right?
Yeah.
If there's something people are collecting data and making it public, like definitely fires. Right. And so the areas are just like anytime there's just 2 sightings within 5 miles of each other, I just merged all that together and made a polygon out of that because that kind of shows like a dense area.
Sure. I see that. Yeah. And to me, it's when you map it this way, it really shows the significance of possibly where they could move or roam in that area too. So it kind of gives you a bigger perspective rather than just a single little dot, which I find
totally. Because if you can see the ones like if you can see like the shape of a circle, it means there's a report dot in the middle of that circle.
Right. There's a dot right there. I think this is my favorite map of yours. I got to be honest, because it's just, well, it shows the density, and I think, if these beings are out there, then it also shows that they migrate, that they have a bigger space of moving around. These people will say, oh, there's this group that lives, or there's this individual that lives at this one spot. Well, we as humans, we move around. So why not? Why wouldn't there be?
I think it also shows that like these kind of wildfires we're experiencing in the West would be really bad for Bigfoot if they're real.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Like these fires, especially the ones here in the Cascades, all take place in high density areas.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Which is interesting. They're in the high density areas. Are they also I'm trying to look and I can't really see city names. And I think they all look a little bit east of the large cities of if you're driving south in Oregon.
They are. They're in the Cascades or the Cascade foothills.
Right.
And that's my bad cartography wise. I should have made that Bigfoot layer transparent so you could see the city names.
Yeah, no, that's still fantastic. I love it. Let's jump ahead here. I wanted to jump to Pierce County. Now, Pierce County, for anybody that knows, if you're looking at this map, or if you're listening, Olympia is kind of in the, I don't like to say armpit because it has bad connotations when people say that. It's it's the south of the Puget Sound, which is the body of water that comes down from Pacific Ocean, and it goes straight down and kind of divides up Washington a little bit. And it's where we have the Olympic rainforest, the national forest combines with the Cascades. So you get this really bizarre forest where you get, a rainforest, the only rainforest north of the North Hemisphere, combined with the Cascades. So Pierce County, Mount Rainier is in Pierce County, but it's fairly populated. It's one of the most populated counties in Washington state, isn't it? That's what, I grew up in King County, north of there.
I mean, yeah, it's, I-5 corridor. You got
I-5
Puyallup,
right here.
You've got the Fort Lewis Joint Base, Lewis McChord, which, clearly has a large population. And you've got like all of or most of Tacoma.
Right. Now, Fort Lewis and McChord Joint Base, there are so many sightings that have been reported.
That's true. I've heard, I don't have them in my database here, but I have heard like a lot about sightings on Lewis McChord.
Isn't that wild? Well, they've got the huge artillery, and I can hear them from my house when they're practicing. That's how close I am to the base. And then we've got the huge planes that are landing. We have a bunch coming in now. Some of them from the Middle East are coming over, actually. They're coming back home. Yeah. So yesterday I saw a bunch coming in. But that's interesting to me, where you have soldiers that are very careful, because if you're military, I would assume you have to be careful with what you're seeing out there. Not careful with what you're seeing, but how you report what you're seeing. I would assume you need to be careful.
Yeah, I've noticed that's a tradition in Bigfoot sort of lore or like reporting, is that people tend to put a lot more stock in reports from soldiers or police officers or other folks who have kind of, I don't know if you would call it authority,
credibility, I guess.
Yeah, credibility, maybe. Yeah,
they've had to take a lie detector to get their job.
Yeah,
that kind of thing. Not that those
or like
hold up in court,
like you mentioned, their job could be at risk potentially by.
Yeah,
and a lot of times, if you hear an interview with a cop or soldier about Bigfoot, they maintain their anonymity,
or they're
which
retired.
is understandable.
Yeah. Or retired. Absolutely.
Oh yeah, retired. Yeah.
Now this, I believe, is that salmon. Isn't that right?
Yes.
This is the salmon map. All right, so let's go back and talk about that here.
Okay, so as we were talking about, like, salmon runs are seasonal, and I looked it up, and they occur in the fall and summer. So as you can see on the title of the map there, it says Pierce County summer and fall Bigfoot sightings by proximity to confirmed salmon streams. And this is one of my favorite maps because I like to try to get a statistic out of some of these maps. And in this one, I thought the statistic was somewhat significant. So what you have here is 42%, and I remember this one because this is like one of my favorite maps, of the summer and fall reports are within 1 mile of an active salmon stream. And I mean, that's not a super high correlation, but it's like, it's high enough to make me think that there's a pattern there. Like, if Bigfoots are real, and these are real reports of actual Bigfoots being observed, then it seems to indicate that they do like to avail themselves of salmon as a food source.
Yeah.
So, and I like that because that's like what I want to try to do with these maps a lot of the times is Bigfoot enthusiasts and Bigfoot researchers will they have a lot of theories, that they say. And part of the goal of these maps is to like take one of those theories and try to prove it with the data I have access to. And in this case, if you take the theory, Bigfoot likes to eat salmon. In this case, I think the data, does a decent job of backing that up. And I always like it when that happens.
Absolutely. You're data driven. And when you take data and it kind of supports theory. I mean, basically that's what data is for. Data is for to support theory, right? And to prove or disprove a theory, And so this helps with that, I think.
And I wouldn't say, any of my maps could rise to the level of proving like any of these theories, but this one certainly lends credence to the idea.
It's very interesting. I mean, who doesn't love salmon? My one of my kiddos just said, "Dad, when are you going to make salmon again?" So I have to go get some. But yeah, it is definitely a staple in the Pacific Northwest and up through British Columbia, up to Alaska, and so it makes a lot of sense. And you look at the density of reported sightings of Sasquatch, Bigfoot, and we are in the thick of it. You and I, we live in the thick of it in the world. Doesn't mean they're not everywhere. I mean, we could talk Florida later, but there's so much there. Let's jump to there you go. So this is kind of with the food crops as well. I found this one interesting too, because I was looking down in Yakima Valley, which is down where there's a lot of orchards. It's drier. It's kind of near what we call our Napa Valley of the North, with lots of wineries. And there are some reports on wineries and in vineyards over here. When you get open to Kennewick over on the right side of the screen in the Tri-Cities area, there have been, I don't see any markings there, but I've read a lot about those.
The thing is that I didn't do all the Washington reports, so I cut out those eastern counties from this analysis.
Okay. All right. Olympics. So let's go out to the Olympic National Park. This is one of my favorite places in the world. I've spent many time up on Hurricane Ridge, out in Forks, which if anybody's listening, I hate to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway, Josh. That's where Twilight takes place. So you got to look out for werewolves and vampires, right?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, good grief. Yeah. Okay. All right. So this is interesting too. Now you have timber harvest plots. I've always wondered how you feel, or anybody might feel, about harvesting, clear cutting, logging, and how does that affect Bigfoot and its migration and sightings?
Well, this map I thought was very interesting because you can see like the sightings are really dense in these harvest plots.
Yeah.
Way denser than within the national park.
Now, is that accessibility, you think, by humans, possibly?
I mean, yeah, that's one really like reasonable explanation, is just that people are always in these plots harvesting timber, right, and thus have more of an opportunity to spot any Bigfoots that might be around.
You go into the Olympic National Forest and you have to hike to get in there. You really do. And it's tall, it's steep. It's odd. I mean, I've done some hiking back in there, which is pretty fun.
If you notice, the plots are all within the Olympic National Forest, but not the Olympic National Park.
Right. Okay.
So this is something that Bigfoot, and I might bother some Bigfoot researchers when I say this, right? Bigfoot researchers are always like talking about how it's a cover-up because it's going to ruin timber harvest and this and that. But like, I think there's a misconception about what kind of land timber gets harvested on. Because timber, by and large, does not get harvested on private land. Timber gets harvested on national forest land.
Mm-hmm.
National forests are, in a huge part, managed like tree farms. And so when, Bigfoot researchers are comparing the whole Bigfoot thing to like that spotted owl thing, and like, property rights and this and that, that's just logging company propaganda.
Interesting. Yeah.
No one's ever lost their property rights because of an animal. Like, that's just not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And resource extraction has almost never been slowed down because of an animal.
Let me ask you this, Josh, and feel free to say I'm not going to answer that. Do you think, because this leads into this here, do you think that there is some kind of cover up? I mean, I could give my own opinion on that. Do you think the government is hiding things, as you will hear on a bunch of different podcast interviews and opinions? Or do you think when you look at the data that you found here, that doesn't support that?
Well, I don't know if the data has much to say about it, but my personal opinion is that no, I don't think there's a government cover up regarding Bigfoot.
Okay, I'm with you personally, but okay. Yeah, there's too many things to cover up.
Yeah, I mean, if they were going to cover, I mean, they are. I'm sure things are covered up.
Oh,
I
sure.
don't know that Bigfoot's one of them.
Yeah, that's absolutely. All right, so I want to keep looking at these because there's so many, but we're going to run out of time here. So real quickly, this is the one you kind of popped in here for me. I think this is Elma, right in the center, where you can listen to season 2 episode. I think it's 6 and 7. Take place in Elma and Aberdeen, which is one of which is right on the tip of Grays Harbor, which opens up to the Pacific Ocean. This is where I go surfing in Westport. I'm not very good. Been up for 5 seconds.
That's the one place I've ever been surfing.
Yeah, it's cold. I go there. Go there in February, but suit up. You got to have your wetsuit. But February apparently is the best time to go. And I got my big old longboard because I'm still working on it. And there's been sightings actually out there. If you look up the coast, there have been a lot of sightings in Ocean Shores, which is this little, really, how much elevation? It's like 12-foot elevation, and there's the story of the old man with the old Sasquatch that would sit on his porch with him, I've heard. Just some really interesting stories there. But tell me about this map here. I know you dropped this in for me, which I love.
Well, I honestly just made this map to go along with your episode because you were nice enough to invite me on your podcast. So I figured I'd just make a map, for you of the region that you were making a story episode about.
Absolutely. If you're looking at this, you can see the Star of Elma. That sounded like the Star of David. You can see Elma that's has a star on it, let's say. And then if you look at the area, this little town, this is just north or south right here. You can see down to the southwest of that. That is actually, I went out there. I found the spot where the sighting took place in 95, where the characters Jen and Judy, which of course they are, names are changed, but that's where they saw multiple sightings. Then up north is where the next characters were lost on a logging road and saw it run across the road. So it's literally that area right there, around Highway 101. All right. So thank you for sharing that. If anybody else is wondering too, Aberdeen, this is where Kurt Cobain, the front man for Nirvana, you and I both know because I mean, you're wearing plaid, so obviously you listen to Nirvana. So
I am a big Nirvana fan, to be honest. I mean,
I am too. Yeah.
I mean, who isn't really? They're one of the most popular bands.
I was gonna say, but that's Aberdeen, which is kind of the gateway to the Olympic National Forest as well. When you go up north, which is incredible, and I would suggest to anybody, if you come to Pacific Northwest, make your way to Aberdeen. I've kind of warn you out a little bit with the maps, but this is incredible stuff. I have a couple questions I want to ask you real quick. And because I'm a super geek, I am going to start, and I have a little lick to start us off. I've got 4 questions I'm going to ask you real quick here. 4 questions. 4 questions. 4 questions with Russ. All right. So I'm a dork. All right, here we go. So I've got 4 questions for you. Josh, we've talked all about Sasquatch. We've talked all about Bigfoot and mapping, and it changed my perspective a lot. And I really appreciate that. So I'm going to ask you 4 questions that have nothing to do with Bigfoot because I want listeners and viewers to get to know you a little bit. And I think it's kind of fun. So question number 1, what music conjures memories for you of your life and why?
Well, if you're watching the video, you can see the guitars and records behind me. I'm music is to quote that one character in Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. Music is my life.
Oh, the beginning, the DJ, right?
Yeah, it's one of the Cannibal Family.
That's right. Oh, that's right. That's right.
What's his name? He's got the metal head.
It wasn't
Anyway,
Grandpa. I can't remember. Yeah, go
I
ahead.
digress, but I really love music, and a lot of music conjures memories of my life. But like the stuff that I listened to when I was a kid that I still listen to, mainly because it was like what my dad listened to, and I got into it, is like Bob Dylan and the Grateful Dead.
Right on.
Really, those two. I mean, probably Bob Dylan's my favorite musical artist. Grateful Dead's my favorite band. And I listened to those when I was a kid. I listen to them now. I listen to the new stuff. I listen to every album. With the Dead, I listen to all the live material.
Yeah.
Some people will be like, oh, I love the Dead, but I don't like the 90s, or I don't like when Donna Jean sings, or this and that. I'm not like that. I like everything about the Grateful Dead. And so for them, for they definitely conjure memories for me, and Bob Dylan as well. The Grateful Dead and Bob Dylan would be the answer to that question.
I love it. Fantastic. Number 2, what is your favorite horror movie, if you have one, and why?
Oh, well, that's a good question, because I really, really love horror movies.
Excellent.
And unfortunately, I haven't watched any in a while. My wife and I have a fairly new baby daughter.
And congratulations.
Thank you. But she's taken away my horror movie watching time.
Yeah.
But I might just have to be a little basic right now. And because I think it's one of the first horror movies to, and I hate to say this because I love all horror movies, but like one of the first horror movies to quote unquote elevate the genre, and just to be a absolutely phenomenal all around piece of art, is The Shining.
Oh yeah.
Which
Absolutely.
we mentioned earlier. And
yes.
Then I have to put in an honorable mention for another movie that some people might debate me as to whether it's horror, but I will die on the hill that it is, and that's Alien.
That is totally horror. I'm with you 100%. Sci-fi horror. Definitely.
Yeah. So I really love Alien.
Okay.
And I really love The Shining, but of course everybody really loves The Shining, right?
So both of those, I wouldn't say Alien has any kind of paranormal aspect to it, but it definitely has an unknown creature. Do you find yourself drawn to it because of that, or what draws you to that movie?
Well, it's just a really great movie, but
Geiger, I think, is the artist. Is that his name?
H.R. Geiger.
H.R. Geiger. Yeah.
But yes, I love creature movies. So I do like that about it. But I mean, Alien is just like a fabulous movie from beginning to end. There's no fat on that movie. Every scene is perfect.
Right. Exactly. I know. And William Hurt, isn't he the one, I think, that something crawls out of him? No,
it's Harry Dean Stanton.
Yeah, that's who it was. Okay. Yeah. Amazing movie. All right. 3rd out of 4 question. In your spare time that's not related to mapping or GPS, what do you like to do?
Well,
similar
answer to the first question there is make music.
Okay.
So I like to play guitar, and I play, all sorts of different instruments, and do a lot of home recording, and yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
Play music with other people, play in bands, stuff like that.
Okay.
That's my favorite hobby. I also really love backpacking and hiking.
Okay. I was going to ask, do you get out in the woods? You got all these maps here. Do you ever kind of go and try to find one of these areas?
Definitely. And I would mention, I have put the database like on my phone, like so I can look at it on Google Earth. And so whenever I go hiking, I'm like, oh, are there any sightings or reports near here? And I'll check it out that way.
Do you have any moment of trepidation before you head out, knowing that there was a sighting in that area and you're about to go into the woods?
I like that question. It's interesting because I used to kind of like be frightened a little bit in the woods. And I've spent a lot of time in the woods because of my job and just the amount of backpacking I've done. I thru hiked the Appalachian Trail. So I've just spent months in the woods. And I did always used to kind of have a fear, but it's interesting. The more I've engaged with the Bigfoot subject lately, the less afraid I've been.
Isn't that interesting?
It's almost like facing your fear. Do you know what I mean?
I do, except I'll still never hold a spider. But yes, I do understand that. Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good way to put it. I have the same thing. I'll go out when I had an experience. I'll just keep it at that. I went out to the same area again, and I was very nervous as I packed up to drive out in my truck and had on the logging road. And as soon as I put my feet on the ground on the trail by myself, I was at peace.
Yeah.
And it's wild how that can kind of happen to you. That's a great answer. I appreciate that. Okay, last question, kind of a random one. If you could go back to any time in history, what would it be and why?
I like that question too. And you know what? I think that I would like to see the Americas prior to colonization.
Ooh, interesting.
Because there's so much that we've lost as a species.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to, I mean, some of it was obviously with nefarious intent, but a lot of it was just like, okay, there was disease, and indigenous people didn't necessarily write things down in stone, or they kept records on, fiber, or so obviously there's bad intent that comes along with colonialism, but I don't want to put it 100% on that. The complete loss of cultures that happened, basically starting in 1492. There is some bad intent there, but it's also, there's a lot of unintended consequences that caused it. But if I could, I would love to just witness one of these indigenous cultures of the North America in its fluorescence.
That's incredible. That, I've thought about this question myself, and I don't know why, but I've never considered that as one of the possibilities. And now that you bring it up and you talk about it, I think that is my number one thing. I think I would do the same. I think it would be pretty incredible to see.
Yeah, if you could see the Mississippian mound builder culture in 1491.
Wow.
Or if you could see, one of the cultures of the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
They got a little bit closer to seeing that. We got a little bit closer to seeing that because the way colonialism had to push across an entire nation before we got there.
Took a while, didn't it?
An entire continent, rather.
Took a while.
But, or, if you could set foot in Tenochtitlan in 1491 and just see what that would have looked like. And before it was just kind of, and when you look up the statistics of what smallpox did, it killed 90% of the population in a matter of like 50 to 100 years.
Just wiped it out.
And that's an apocalypse right there.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So my answer to that is I'd like to see, prior to that event.
Just make sure you are not going to spread smallpox to anybody, right?
Well, yeah, hopefully I'd be in some kind of time travel or bubble.
Right. You and Guy Pearce can sit down and have a talk about time travel. All right. So Josh, I'm going to ask you some questions here. Can you tell me what you think Sasquatch, Bigfoot is?
Well, being a data driven kind of person, I don't know that I can rightly answer that.
Okay.
I guess like what I can say is that they are a phenomenon that many people witness. You can say that for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
A large hairy biped that many people witness. But I can't go farther than that. On it, just being honest, like I don't know. Have
you had any kind of experience or anything that when you're out in the wilderness that makes you go, I wonder?
I have never had a weird experience in the wilderness, despite the amount of time I've spent.
It's fantastic.
I've had weird feelings. Weird, but absent any stimuli I can put my finger on, I have to chalk that up to psyching myself out.
Sure. Kind of getting in your own head.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Last question for you before we say goodbye. Do you ever think we should have hard proof and evidence?
It'd be cool if
not
we did.
Will we, Not will we, should we?
Oh, should we?
Should we have that?
That's an interesting question. I think that if it's a real species, then we should, because just like other charismatic species of animals that we take a lot of effort to protect, like panda bears and whales and stuff, knowing for sure would let us like kind of do that kind of stuff for Bigfoot. So I think that I would answer that in the affirmative, because it would help us be kind of stewards of them.
Okay.
Hopefully. That's being very optimistic about people, I guess.
It's giving people a lot of credit.
Yes, it's giving people a lot of credit, but I do think that people deserve that credit in some senses when you look at what we've done with other animal species in some cases.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would agree. And I'm starting to see this shift, and maybe it's just me being hopeful in this time when it seems like everything's blowing up in our faces, but I'm seeing a shift, at least where I'm at here in Washington State, probably where you're seeing it in Oregon too, where people seem to be having this call to nature a little bit more. I think people are just getting sick of it all. But I just feel like there's this kind of movement to respecting nature a little bit more. And again, maybe I'm just being too optimistic, but I don't know. I've kind of seen that a little bit. It's like a shift, this paradigm shift is happening.
I hope so. I think we really need to have that paradigm shift before it's too late.
Yeah, well, I can't not agree with you more, because looking at your maps and looking at the sightings, if you will, it's everywhere. They're everywhere. And we need to take care of our land in order to respect. So it's almost like I feel like people are starting to understand just how vital and important each species is and has a role to play. And I think your maps, I think, definitely show a little bit of that, which is very interesting, like with the crops and such.
Yeah, everything's connected, and all boundaries that you see on a map are arbitrary.
Yeah, they're made by us.
Nothing is actually divided. Something that happens here has an effect on whatever happens over here. And that's a very important thing to understand, I think, if you want to go about being a good steward of the earth.
Josh, thanks so much for being here today. What a pleasure. You have somebody you wanted to mention real quickly about something you're sporting on your head.
Oh, yeah. I would give a shout out to Forrest Floor. She's a Bigfoot researcher out of, I believe, upstate New York. And she makes some great research products and, has some really cool information on her website. So give her a follow.
If people want to learn more about you, or they want to follow you, or they want to learn more about GIS and what you do, where can they find you?
It's just at PNW Bigfoot Maps on Twitter or Instagram, or both.
Okay, awesome. Good. I will drop those links in there for you. And if you're watching or if you're listening, don't forget to follow our Instagram, PNW Sasquatch Shadows, or you can also go on Facebook. There's a page there, Old Mountain Media. That's old with an E, Mountain Media. And don't forget to subscribe to Something Cryptid This Way Comes. Really bizarre, wild, immersive stories, just to throw you in there. And if you've not had an encounter and you really want to have one, but you're a little scared to have one, drop into one of these stories, and hopefully you'll feel like you had a mini encounter. That's kind of the goal, to give people a little bit of experience and scare the heck out of them, or make them just at peace. Josh, thanks again. Thanks for being here, and we'll talk again really soon. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks so much, Russ. I appreciate you having me on.
Something Cryptid This Way Comes is a production of Old Mountain Media. Visit us on Instagram at PNW Sasquatch Shadows and Facebook at Old Mountain Media.
Something Cryptid This Way Comes.